I am excited to welcome back to the FLA CatNip Podcast, Hockey Hall of Famer, four-time Stanley Cup champion as captain of the New York Islanders, three-time winner of the Norris Trophy for best defenseman in the league, and of course, we Panther fans remember him well for his 20 years color commentating for the Cats. Denis Potvin, how you doing? And how about those Florida Panthers right now?
I have to say, I am surprised. I can't imagine that back in March, early April, when the Florida Panthers are trying to get into the playoffs, that one would imagine how well they have played. You know, the early start wasn't good against the Boston Bruins, but something seemed to have happened. Coach Paul Maurice is getting a lot of credit for it, for uniting the team. But having had such a long relationship with the Florida Panthers, as you mentioned in broadcasting, I'm really happy for them. Really happy.
And you won, of course, 19 consecutive playoff series in a row over five seasons, 5 Stanley Cup appearances, 4 of them championships. So about the grind. And of course, we're watching these playoffs and I'm thinking every game, wow, this is a grind. And the greatest example of that would be this game 1 marathon of an overtime. And I'm wondering if you can comment on what it's like.
You do not think about the next shift. We played in many overtimes as the Islanders during playoffs. And of course, winning game 6 was an overtime victory that got us our first cup against the Flyers. You just want to focus on the next shift. You don't want to be thinking too far ahead. Wasn't thinking of, I want to get a goal. I want to be, the guy that gets the winning goal. Things will just happen. And the key is to try and just have enough energy. And like many of the good coaches today, they say, let the puck do the work. Rather than me try and skate up the ice with a puck and create an offensive play, it is much better for me to get it to one of my offensive players and then follow up. So the little things become important. Move the puck quickly, take shorter shifts. If typically they're 40, 45 seconds, try and focus on as soon as you can get off after 30 seconds, do that. So they're little mental games that you can prepare for when you get into the overtime.
Brandon Montour playing over 56 minutes or something like that in that game. That was unbelievable, right?
What a wonderful surprise he has been, for the Florida Panthers. I mean, probably their steadiest number 1 defenseman right now.
And all about that. And that brings me to another point. And I wanted to talk about the big defensemen on this team. Right. And you got to play a role like that for the Islanders, obviously. But we've got these 3 big guys spread out across 3 different defensive lines. We got Mark Stahl, Radko Gudas, and Aaron Ekblad. And they are keeping guys out of the net area, out of the crease. I want to talk about that, how important that is in the playoffs, what those kind of battles are like. If you could take us into the head of those kind of guys in these deep playoff runs.
Well, first of all, of the 3 players you mentioned, Radko Gudas, I think, is the smallest. And he probably, I would imagine he's playing at about 210. So you've got Ekblad at 225. And then, of course, Stahl, in around that same size. The one thing that your goaltender will tell you in those situations, and it hasn't changed, and the planning of positioning your body more so for not allowing the opponent to get to the front of the net. So the idea is try as best as you can to position your body to stop players from screening your goaltender, so that if your goalie has a chance to see the puck, the chances are he's going to make the save. And right now, Bobrovsky is playing as good as I've ever seen him play. Even the days when he won the Vezina Trophy with Columbus, he is playing as well as I've ever seen him play for the Florida Panthers. But to your point, the big defensemen are keeping the opponents, a smaller team really overall of Carolina Hurricanes, away from the front of the net, or at least in position where Bobrovsky can see the puck and then make his saves.
We're obviously doing a great job defensively, keeping these scores very tight. We talk about it almost being razor thin, but let's talk about some of those things that the Panthers are doing right in this series. And like you said, a lot of credit towards Paul Maurice. But these, particular defensemen, let's say like Mark Stahl, we weren't giving a lot of credit to a guy like that in the regular season. We were wondering if this guy, what if his career was over with us, and then all of a sudden we get into the playoffs and he's a playoff guy. And I want to talk about that kind of mentality and, of course, what Paul Maurice brings to it, this kind of playoff hockey that differs so much from the regular season.
Well, again, it's unique for every team, but the Florida Panthers had a new coach in Paul Maurice. Paul Maurice had to learn about his players. He had to know them. So picture the fact that with Stahl as an example, he may have played Stahl with several different defensemen just to see where the chemistry was. And now in today's game, you're allowed to play, not allowed, but the numbers are such that you have 4 full lines and 3 full sets of defensemen. Just to go back in the early days of the 70s and the 80s, we didn't have 3 full lines. And oftentimes we played a whole game with 5 defensemen. If you wanted to create that 4th line, you had to take one away from the defense. So I think Paul Maurice, over the course of the several months where he coached, tried every kind of combination, has been a wonderful benefit to the Florida Panther defense. And the other thing I'll mention is Aaron Ekblad, number 1 pick, obviously one of the leaders on the team. I don't see him taking unnecessary offensive chances. See, it's not about padding your stats in the playoffs. It looks to me like Aaron Ekblad is playing the best hockey I have seen him play, maybe in his career. He is doing his job, as you mentioned, clearing the front of the net, moving the puck up the ice, and just keeping his role as a defense first. Al Arbor used to always say, Dennis, I don't mind you carrying the puck up the ice, but let's remember, if you're in good position defensively, you'll always be in good position offensively. I never forgot that. Al Arbor was right then, and he's right today. And the Panthers are playing very, very solidly defensively.
It feels like smart hockey. It feels like they're doing the simple things, chipping it off the glass, out in the zone, high flips, forecheck, really not the let's say the sexiest hockey. It's just simple playoff hockey. And they're doing the smart things. And yet, like you mentioned, these defensemen, they are breaking into the plays. You see Montour, you even saw Mahura rush towards the net the other night and draw that penalty in game 2. You see them taking their chances, but they're not doing it at the cost of the rest of the team and the game.
When you mentioned something like that particular play, it's very important. If Montour is playing left D, and the left winger has got to understand that it's his turn now to move back and cover for Montour. So basically, left D will come the left defenseman. So those things are really working well for the Panthers, and they're not missing a stride. I think the bottom line, in my view, is that the best Florida Panther players are playing better than the best Hurricane players. Barkov is in control like I've never seen him before. That goal he had the other night was just an amazing, confident play by a captain. And it appears as though the team is really feeding off of his excellent play. Night after night, he wins 55, 56% of his faceoffs. He's physical. He's doing all of the right things. And so are, the rest of the Panthers. We'll see if they can keep that up.
It's a big difference, as you mentioned, Barkov, than I saw from playoffs last year. He's way more physical this year. He's always been an offensive weapon, but you can see him really laying on the body, even taking a couple penalties here and there. And so that's something you don't see of Barkov normally.
If I can just interject on your comment, that's why Bill Zito made the trade. How do you get rid of a guy like Huberdeau, scored 115 points, by far the top scorer for the Panthers, and by far the best numbers in his league? Barkov and Huberdeau together were wonderful. But in a playoff series, as you mentioned, a team like Tampa, a team with a little playoff experience, can break that up. So you're going to need a little grit. That's why when you see a Bossy and Trottier, you saw Clark Gillies on the wing. Tkachuk is a terrific player on his own. We're seeing that. But the important part of it, and I think the very first interview I heard with Tkachuk was that they're not going to do this to Barkov anymore. The question was about being physical with Barkov. And then in a sense, Barkov not being a mean guy, sometimes you can tame one of those guys. And that's what you're trying to do in the playoffs, get him off his game a little bit. And in the past that happened, but not right now. And Tkachuk is a huge part the success of Barkov.
Kudos to Bill Zito, just having the courage,
really.
to for a moment break all our hearts and trade one of our favorite players in Huberdeau.
Yeah.
And then, of course, just it only takes a few weeks for us to fall in love with this Tkachuk guy. And sure enough, he's taken us to the promised land so far. So excited to have him for 7 more years. Wow.
Yeah.
I was wondering if we could talk a little bit about the pressure that goes into, going into a playoff series with the higher seed or with the President's Trophy or these kinds of things. And now we're playing that underdog role, quote unquote. We just sneak into the playoffs. I know your team in the 78, 79 was playing the Rangers, right, in the Eastern Conference Finals. And so you were the favorite, I believe. And there may have been a little bit more pressure on your team then before you went on those Stanley Cup runs. What do you think is the difference here where the Panthers are coming in as the underdog?
Well, if you take a look at our playoffs, the history of the playoffs, in 1979, Christmas, our team was in 15th place in the NHL out of 16 teams. We worked our way back to a better spot, but eventually made the playoffs. And of course, a lot of things happened that year. We made a trade for Gord Lane. Kenny Morrow showed up March 1st. Butch Goring showed up at the trade deadline. So there were moves that were made by, I love the guy, the architect, Bill Torrey, who often, when asked the same question about, how do you put a team like that, for the playoffs? And he says, well, first of all, you got to understand that you're going to need a certain type of team for the season. And then you need a different kind of team for the playoffs. So every playoff year, Bill Torrey added someone. And that someone always became extremely valuable in that particular playoff season. So in 1980, just to start there, we were not a great team. 1979, we had won the President's Trophy. I don't think there was President's Trophy back then, but we were the best team in the National Hockey League in terms of standings and points. We weren't ready somehow to be able to give what it needs to be given to win the playoffs. And that's why changes were made in 1980. 1981, we're not a great team during the season. 82, we're not a great team. 83, we're not a great team. We're not the best in the league by far. But when the playoffs started, we had worked our whole season. It's a little bit like what I'm crediting Paul Maurice with, working his team, understanding who plays well with who, trying every combination you can during the season. Why is that? Leading up to what you're going to have during the playoffs. Let me throw a little something at you. We were so good as a team. The longer the playoffs went, I'm not talking about overtime. First round, second round, we got better. Third round, we got better. And the final rounds, I'm going to put you on the spot. 4 years in a row, we played in the finals. You have to win 16 games to do what we did. How many did we lose?
Ooh, that is a great question.
That's right. In the 4 years of Stanley Cup finals, we won 16 games, lost 3.
Wow.
Is that an amazing stat? We lost 2 to the Flyers the very first year. We lost 1 to Minnesota the second year. Third year, we went 4-0 with Vancouver. And the fourth year, 4-0 against the Oilers.
Unreal.
I saw that the other day, and I'm thinking, I can't believe it. You just don't think about how well-oiled machine we had going in the playoffs. And of course, as the series went on, we just got better and better and better.
And we're seeing what you're mentioning there with the Panthers now. It's pretty clear. Every series, I feel an immense improvement. There were obviously all the nerves at the beginning of the Boston series, and
Sure.
we fall down 2 games in that series, and we managed to come back. But the kind of team that we're witnessing playing Carolina right now was not the team we were playing when we were playing the Bruins.
Well, you wonder why this is happening, and sometimes, as we've said before, we lost in 1978 to the Leafs, not as good a team as we were, obviously. In 1979, as I mentioned, we were the best in the league, lost to the Rangers. Losing is not such a bad thing, as long as you put it in perspective. The Florida Panthers start of the playoffs against the Boston Bruins, I am sure they were in awe. The Boston Bruins had an incredible, historic season. You walk into the Boston Gardens, you start playing against this team that just seems to have no weakness. And then all of a sudden you're going, you know what? I'm kind of bored of loving those guys. I don't want to do it anymore. I don't want to be in awe of Bergeron or Marchand. In our case, in the 70s, when we started having success, we were playing against the New York Rangers and Montreal Canadiens. Guy who? Steve who? After a while, you've got to start thinking about, if I played better and elevate my game. I think the Florida Panthers had that kind of emotion just by watching, and the experience that I've had in the past. It seemed to me that they got to a point with the Boston Bruins where they said, the Boston who? And all of a sudden, things started. They were hitting more. They were challenging the defense more. They weren't allowing a lot of open ice with great forecheck. And in the end, it was tremendous speed that helped them win that series. I read all the score sheets after each game just to take a look. Boston Bruins in one game, particularly a pivotal game, they had 25 giveaways.
Wow.
And the Florida Panthers, I believe, had 7 or 8. Well, what does that tell you? It tells you that a great team like the Boston Bruins don't like to be rushed. That's what we did against the Oilers in 1983. Wayne Gretzky, as great as he was, I wasn't going to give him all the time to make a great play. I was going to go right at him and force him to try and give the puck away, or try and make whatever play he wanted to make a little quicker than he wanted to. Just get them out of their routine, their step. And I think that's what happened to the Florida Panthers, and they haven't looked back. I mean, against Toronto, every defenseman seemed to be hesitant and waiting to get hit and couldn't get to the puck first. And Toronto is a great team, but it's just the tenacity that the Panthers have shown right through these first 2 games against Carolina is very impressive.
Yeah, it seems like we won't take our foot off the gas. And I believe that was a big lesson we learned from the last playoffs, where obviously, we win a round against Washington last year, but then we get swept by the Tampa Bay Lightning. And you see it even in Tkachuk's celebration last night, as funny as it was. He points right to the door. He says, let's get out of here.
I love it.
And it's that mentality. You say, we're not done here. Let's just keep moving. We got momentum. Keep going. Get out. Let's go to the next game.
And I think it's fortuitous to have the exit right there where Tkachuk scores the 2 overtime goals. The door is right there. And what the funny part was, especially after game 1, winning after 4 overtimes, the thought was, oh, he's really tired. He doesn't want to sort of meet guys at center ice or anything. But in game 2, after winning it on the power play goal, just less than 2 minutes into the overtime, boom, boom. He kind of just pointed at the door and off he went. I think, to me, that is a visual I'll never forget.
Yeah.
Because I don't know, he never thought about it. The door happened to be there. You recognize that was the door to his dressing room, and they can do all the hugging and kissing once they get in there. I love that part of it. That's real drama. I think that's something I really appreciated of the first 2 wins.
Totally. He's the whole package. I mean, off the ice, on the ice, it's everything. I hear it in his interviews, the way he celebrates, the way he leads the team.
His dad was a very similar kind of player. In this very, very short term, Matthew is really exceeding a lot of what he and his brother and maybe even his father did. But, the family is rooted around playing hockey this way. Really. I mean, Brady in Ottawa plays this way, and their dad played that way. So in any event, it's it's genetics, and I can almost hear the phone calls every night from Dad. It's like my dad would say, he'd say, "Hey Dad, how you doing? How'd you like the game?" "Well, Dennis, I thought you could have passed the puck a little quicker. I thought you could have shut down." You can never quite satisfy your dad, but you appreciate that he's calling you on the other line.
One other topic, you mentioned it a little earlier, but that would be Sergei Bobrovsky. We've been waiting for this guy to come alive for a bit now on the Panthers, and he certainly has. And, you had a hot goalie going into the playoffs for all your series.
Yeah.
And so I was curious if you could make some comments more on what he's putting for this team and what it's like to play in front of a goalie that's playing hot.
Well, first of all, again, in watching Bobrovsky, and I've watched him over the last couple of years as well, and it was always a little bit like, well, is he playing his best? Is he tired? Well, Bobrovsky got injured this year, and he missed a number of games, and that's where that fellow Lions came in and started playing pretty well, which was timely and helped them get into the playoff spot.
Definitely.
So Bobrovsky had a chance to rest. There are no more Marty Brodeurs who could play 73 games in the season. That ain't going to happen. As a matter of fact, it didn't happen in the early 80s. If you look back at the statistics, Billy Smith probably never played more than 40 or 42 games during the year.
Wow.
We had Chico Resch, and then later on we had Rolly Melanson. So Al Arbor, when it came time to get to the playoffs, he made no bones about it. He wanted one goaltender, but he wanted him fresh. So Billy Smith, every year we won the Stanley Cup, I don't believe he played more than like 42 games during the year. Bobrovsky, it's always sad to see a guy have an injury, but the other goaltending issues that the Florida Panthers had during the season now is coming back to help them because, boy, does he look fresh.
And I know you're very familiar with scoring important overtime goals in the playoffs. In your first Stanley Cup series, you scored the game winner in game 1, I believe, against the Philadelphia Flyers, and that was in the 80s season. And so, of course, Tkachuk now pots 2 in a row in this Carolina series in the Eastern Conference Finals. So I was wondering if you could walk us through a little bit some of those emotions of what it's like to put one of those kind of goals in and what Tkachuk could be experiencing right now with the team.
Well, every experience is a little bit different, but let me take you back to that game, that first game in 1980 Finals in Philadelphia. The game opens up in Philadelphia. I score against Billy Smith. I thought Billy Smith was down on the ice, scramble in front of the net. I was trying to hold people back. I pushed the puck towards Billy, and it goes underneath him and in the net.
The tortured own goal.
I just looked up at the referee, and I did see a video of it afterwards, and I got this look on my face, kind of, please, find a way to say that it's not a goal. But what happened after that was interesting. Mel Bridgman, very good player for the Flyers, as we're going back to center ice, he skates by me and he says, "Thank you, Potvin." And I'm thinking to myself, you son of a gun, So the game, we're down 2-1 in the second period. I end up scoring the tying goal, and that leads us into the overtime. And Jimmy Watson pulls down John Tonelli, who is trying to get to the net, gets a holding penalty, so we get on the power play. And Stefan Pearson and I often changed from, I would start on the left on the power play as a defenseman or on the right. Faceoff was on the right, and it just seemed as though there was a need for me to be there. Of course, being a left-hand shot, that meant my stick was facing the center of the ice. John Tonelli wins the puck battle in the corner again, comes around the net, and all I see is open ice in front of me, right down to Pete Peters, the goaltender. So I just slide right in, and I yelled, and Johnny made a perfect pass, redirected it, and that was the overtime victory, which turned out to be huge because we're able to win the series on home ice in game 6. And that's what the Panthers did with their first victory. It's the first thing I thought about.
I visited potvansocks.com the other day, and I do, of course, have my own pair of Potvin socks, but I wanted to give you another opportunity to bring that in. And I noticed you got a new line there, and that's the Potvins cups. And that's you got some mugs in there.
The story, the Potvin sucks chant. And I didn't want to make it confrontational or anything like that. I thought there's got to be a way where I can, our company can be viewed as, giving an olive branch, handing it out. Because that chant has been going on for 43 years.
I'll always remember as a kid, I went to see the Panthers play the Rangers, and you were broadcasting, and there were so many Rangers fans in the stands. And I heard the whistle and then the whole chant, Potvin sucks.
There's never been a professional athlete in any sport that has been vilified, yet I believe respected in New York City, meaning an opposing athlete, and particularly in Madison Square Garden. So you start thinking, well, how can I make this fun? Number one, the Islanders have been terrific. Every time I went to the rig, they always had a bunch there so I could throw them up in the stand. And I even threw them to a bunch of Ranger fans because the launch happened to be October 26th, last season of 2022. And it was the Rangers at the UBS Arena meeting the Islanders.
Perfect timing.
There was a whole crew there, and I could see the Ranger jersey. They're all looking at me, and I started just throwing socks over to that section. And you know what? Not one of them sent it back. So
all right.
I was really happy. I've often said Potvin's cups is what they're saying, not Potvin sucks. And then I hold up the four fingers.
Yep.
So all we did is translate that into a mug, and we also have a cup that is kind of a barbecue cup, orange in color. Same thing with the Potvin's cups, and that is for your summer barbecues, your beer, and whatnot.
No, amazing. And of course, I know you've incorporated a charity component into it as well.
Absolutely,
so,
sure. Let's give you a little insight on what's coming. It's not out on the website yet, but it will be. So you're getting the first dibs. We're going to make socks for the Ukrainian soldiers. So for every sock that is purchased at Potvin Socks, we're going to send a pair to the Ukrainian soldiers who right now, I have read, the mothers and the sisters and everybody are sewing socks because, I don't think many of us understand what war is actually like. That will be one of our contributions in the upcoming several months.
That is very cool. Thank you for mentioning that. I think that's an incredible incentive to keep buying these things. So I've got my pair. They're very good quality. So thank you again, Denny, for taking all this time and of course, indulging in this amazing Florida Panthers hype as the team makes an incredible run. Let's hope they keep going. It's been amazing. It's been the best hockey I've witnessed as a Florida Panther fan in my, 25 years of conscious fanhood. And so, it's been incredible. So thank you again for taking that time.
Well, Kevin, so much congratulations goes your way for the podcast. You're well prepared.
And it is thanks to you that this podcast has gotten up and running. You are our first interview. So it's so good to have you back. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin.